Hello, everybody. Welcome to Boston College Law School. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I'm the faculty director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy. Today, we have gathered for a momentous event, which is the first candidates forum for the Norfolk County District Attorney race. 4 of the candidates running in that race have graciously agreed to participate today, and we look forward to their views. Before we get started, let me briefly describe the Rappaport Center and today's forum. The Rappaport Center is a nonprofit institution whose mission is to inspire, sustain, and improve leadership and dialogue in state and local law and policy. The Rappaport Center neither supports nor opposes any candidate or political party. Consistent with the Rappaport Center's mission, this candidates forum is designed as an educational opportunity for students and for the broader community. Specifically, this forum is designed to help students in the broader community through civil and constructive exchange to understand each candidate's approach to public safety, accountability, and community trust. The questions to our candidates have been informed by the wisdom and knowledge of several seasoned practitioners on the Rappaport Center's advisory board, including lawyers Anthony Benedetti, Donna Padalano, and Professor Michael Cassidy. And lest I forget, today's proceedings are being recorded. After the forum, the recording will be uploaded in its entirety to the YouTube channel of Boston College Law School. Media outlets may report on this event consistent with standard journalistic practices. Today's forum would not have been possible without the help of the Rappaport Center's advisory board, the candidates themselves, and 2 BC law student organizations, the Criminal Law Society and the Public Interest Law Foundation, which are co-hosting this event. To all of you, our thanks. At this point, allow me to introduce our moderator, Professor Stephen Van Dyke. Professor Van Dyke is an assistant clinical professor and co-leads the Criminal Justice Clinic here at Boston College Law School. Before joining the faculty, he worked for over 16 years as a public defender with the Committee for Public Counsel Services. In 2023, he received the Willie J. Davis and Edward J. Dugan Award for Outstanding Criminal Defense Advocacy. Professor Van Dyke is a graduate of Boston College Law School and Cornell University. And with that, let me turn the proceedings over to you, Professor Van Dyke.
Well, thank you very much. It's you we should be clapping for, and our wonderful candidates who have joined us here today for this very important forum. I want to thank everybody who's here joining us in person at Boston College Law School. There's coffee and cookies outside for you, and not so much for the people joining online, no coffee and cookies for you, but thank you for joining us in the future, as this will be recorded and available on YouTube to everyone watching in the future when the Red Sox are no longer fifth in the AL East when you watch this. This is a wonderful opportunity for our law school community to engage with the very important issues at the heart of the race for the next district attorney in Norfolk County. And we are very grateful to all of our participants for being here today. It is very hard to overstate the importance of the role of district attorney. That is a position that shapes lives and will shape the lives and impact the lives of the more than 700,000 people that live in Norfolk County. They will work with victims and survivors, guiding them through the system. They will assure fairness for those who are accused of crimes. They will set priorities for what to prosecute and what not to prosecute. They will make essential decisions on when to ask for bail, what to ask for, and what sentences to ask for in the event of conviction. They'll be in charge of decisions about forfeiture of assets, impositions of penalties, including mandatory minimum penalties, and setting the tone as leader within the county on issues of criminal justice. I want to provide an overview about timing and the format before we get into introductions with our candidates here today. What we have planned is that we have after introductions, roughly 50 minutes of questions that we have prepared, as Professor McCoy said, with the assistance of a panel of experts who have helped us in selecting them. And then we're going to have 30 minutes of questions that were submitted by students and community members. They have been pre-screened, these questions. So that'll take us about 80 minutes total before we have closing statements at 5:45. And then closing remarks from Amanda Teo. The format will be that these questions we will provide both in introductions and in the responses to questions, 90 seconds for a response to these questions. And whoever goes first each round, I'll explain in a minute how that'll work, also gets 60 seconds if they choose to use it at the end to provide some rebuttal or address any issues that came up within that question or any others that they want to respond to as they go along. We had a very, very sophisticated, tech-filled method of deciding how we would choose the order in which people responded. It involved this hat. And what we did was we took the numbers 1 through 4, put them in the hat and drew them. And so we have all of our candidates here, 1 through 4 seated here. And the way it'll work is we will go first with introductions with Attorney Perkins. We'll have the hat in front. The hat will show you who's going first, and then we will pass the hat to our left, to your right, as we go along for each question so that everyone will have a chance to go first. Prosecutors are used to going first and last with opening and closing, so if you're going first, you're also going last if you have the hat in front of you. I want to give a big thank you to Alexis Albert, who's going to be keeping time for us. We helped to set up this event and is keeping time, and she will be providing a 15-second warning to our candidates along with raising her hand, which means time's up. And that will be strictly enforced. You can help too. If you see Alexis's hand up, you can put up your hand too. It'll be like behind the backboard at the TD Garden when the opposing team is shooting a free throw. So we're going to strictly enforce that to the extent that we can. Expectations that we have, both candidates and the audience and myself, is that we are fostering constructive, respectful dialogue about these issues here today. The answers should address the questions generally, not other candidates. There shouldn't be interruptions or questions posed between the candidates to one another. From the audience, we ask you, as Professor McCoy said, silence all of your cell phones, and we ask you to not react within the moment to the answers that are given and to be here with us, enjoying silently and respectfully the very important answers that we're going to have from the candidates. And finally, from me, you've entrusted me, a lifelong public defender, to be here. So my commitment to you is some interjections, perhaps I have questions, but no cross-examination. And in a show of good faith, I've even scrapped the first question I was going to ask you, which is, you want to be the District Attorney of Norfolk County, don't you? Yes or no? Scrap that question. It was inappropriate both in form and in tone. So with that, we will get into the questions, and we will start. I'm going to pass you, Attorney Perkins, the hat. But before we get into it, I just want to give one big round of applause to begin for our and before we get into the questions themselves, I want to provide each of you an opportunity, 90 seconds, for an introduction.
Good afternoon. My name is Djuna Perkins, and I'm running for District Attorney because Norfolk County's justice system is failing. And because while the D in my name may be silent, I am not. For 33 years, I've fought for justice for victims of crime all over Massachusetts, first as an Assistant Attorney General, then as a Suffolk County Assistant District Attorney, in which I held leadership roles, and finally in private practice. The District Attorney has absolute power to determine what to prosecute, and the decisions that she makes can change a family's life forever. Recently, our justice system has been brought to its knees by the misuse of that authority. I didn't wait till it was politically expedient to run. I stepped up nearly 2 years ago because I became a lawyer to stand up for what's right, to speak for those without a voice, and because we're living in times where we all must do our part to stand up for due process and the rule of law. I believe that that everyone deserves justice and that no one is above the law, regardless of who we are, where we're from, or who we know. The next district attorney to restore the community's trust and to end justice in Norfolk County needs to not only be someone who is a professional prosecutor, but also someone who can bring fresh perspectives and ideas, and as well as someone who can bring, as well as someone who is not only committed to the rule of law, but also has the courage to stand up even when it's hard. I believe that because of my personal and professional experience and the endorsements I've received from industry professionals, elected leaders, and community leaders, I am that candidate, and I ask for your vote on September 1st.
Thank you. Next, Attorney Barakat.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Hi, guys. Jim Barakat. I've been a public defender for the last 14 years. Currently in Massachusetts, we incarcerate more individuals than the entire continent of Europe. And it's always interesting to ask why, because when studies show that incarceration does absolutely nothing to reduce recidivism, and in fact, it actually increases recidivism. Ostensibly, the DA likes to talk about that they care about public safety, but does little to combat recidivism themselves. Incarceration also does nothing to rehabilitate, and data-driven prosecution and supporting communities is actually what lowers crime rates in communities that are experiencing higher crime. Now, every day as a defender, I'm faced with the collateral consequences of prosecutorial decision-making. And I stand in solidarity with clients against systems that hide information, systems that conceal misconduct, and value efficiency in prosecutions over the hard work of taking the time to make sure they get things right. Now, my approach, my hope is that we include an approach that's more humane, not just for members of our community, but for Norfolk County. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Lee.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Macy Lee, and I'm also a candidate for Norfolk County District Attorney. I am the only candidate that will be on the ballot on September 1st that will have the proven combination of extensive leadership, management, and state prosecutorial experience. I'm currently the director for the Board of Hearings, Office of Medicaid, one of the largest and busiest adjudicatory boards in Massachusetts. I manage a staff of close to 60, and that includes some BC law interns that come in and out throughout the years. And I oversee close to 30,000 appeals from members, providers, and any sort of nursing home facility discharge that comes your way. So I have the experience of working with unions. I have the experience of hiring and even to some extent disciplining employees and ensuring that the office that I run now adheres to the highest professional standards. I also ensure transparency in my office. Every decision in the last 4 years that has been issued by the Board of Hearings is posted on our website. So anyone who is curious with how we handle mass health adverse action decisions, you can find out on the website. I was also the chief of the narcotics unit for 10 years at Suffolk County, where I managed large-scale wiretap investigations involving federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. I can manage people, I can run an office, and I've proven that in the last 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Attorney Deitch.
Thank you so much, and thank you to BC and the Rappaport Center for having us. It's really nice to be here talking with you all. It's nice to be at BC Law, where I was waitlisted twice when I was applying to law school. I'm not going to hold that against anybody in the room. My name is Adam Deitch, and I too am running for Norfolk County District Attorney. Until this past November, I was a federal prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney in Boston. And I started out there doing all kinds of cases, everything from gun and drug cases to child exploitation and cyber stalking to all kinds of fraud. But what I ended up spending most of my time doing was trying to root out corruption across Massachusetts, including and especially in Norfolk County. I prosecuted state troopers for accepting bribes in exchange for commercial driver's licenses. I prosecuted employees of the RMV for accepting bribes in exchange for regular driver's licenses. And in the end, I saw a drumbeat of cases in Norfolk County that made me say out loud, literally, what on earth is going on in Norfolk County? So I left the U.S. Attorney's Office in November and launched this campaign because I believe what this DA's office needs is wholesale, systemic change, a change in perspective and a change in leadership. So I look forward to the conversation with you all today. Thank you again so much for having us.
Thank you very much. So we will pass the hat now and begin with Attorney Barakat for the first of the prepared questions. And that question is, what are the skills, characteristics, or values that make you the most qualified candidate to be the District Attorney in Norfolk County?
Sure, thanks again, Steve. So, quite like in my introduction, I've spent almost every day in the courtroom seeing the collateral consequences that occur when prosecutors both overcharge and overzealously try to seek incarceration that is disproportionate to, the crime that's charged. I think what would make me most qualified is that seeing from that perspective and knowing what it takes to make a case stick as far as sufficiency of evidence, as far as matters of indictment, we're stuck in this kind of cycle where we want to see a harm being reduced, but we're doing nothing to see that harm being reduced. I think in a way to objectively see, the person, maybe the defendant, whom we're charging as the person that they actually are in making our decisions to, maybe eventually incarcerate this person, or to decide what kind of options we might have to divert that prosecution in general, or I got thrown off by the time here, or to I'm going to pass that on in a second. It's time. There you go. Thanks.
You're going to get the last word as well, so you'll have a
okay,
chance
thanks.
to come back as well.
Am I next?
Yes, Attorney Wood.
I think the skills, qualifications, and experience of the next district attorney should include some of the things I mentioned in my opening statement. But I also think it should include someone who has a multiple level of skill sets acquired from a diverse background and experience. For example, as I mentioned earlier, I am well versed in managing large-scale public-facing organizations, such as the organization in Mass Health. I also think that the next district attorney should have a proven record of integrity, accountability, and transparency. And I've demonstrated that as the director of the Board of Hearings and as well as the chief of the narcotics unit when I was at Suffolk County. I think that the next district attorney should be a good boss, should be someone who works just as hard as her staff, should lead with a steady and mature hand, and should also hold the highest standards for herself. And in my experience, when someone does that, your staff will follow, as my staff now does. I also think that not only is prosecutorial experience essential, but I also think having had the experience of being a defense attorney, of which I had for a year, is also really important because it shows you when you have a client and you have to look that client in the eye and you're your client's lifeline. And you're the only person that can advocate for your client. And that changed me a lot when I became a prosecutor later on in Boston. So that's what I think should happen.
Thank you.
So I think we're in a very unique moment with respect to the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. We've had a series of cases over the past few years that have exposed problems in the office that have caused, I think, all four of us to be up here today. And the problems are partially the cause of they're related to an office that has been run by someone who doesn't have prosecutorial experience. And so I agree with my fellow candidates up here that and criminal law experience is a prerequisite, but we need so much more than that. We're going to need a district attorney to thread a series of needles here, to lead an office of folks who for the most part have dedicated their careers to public service, who for the most part are going into work every day and working hard when they could be getting paid a lot more to do something else. The person's going to need to go in and identify what works and embrace those things while also identifying what isn't working and be prepared and have the courage to make real change. And so I think someone with an outside perspective who's been a prosecutor in perhaps the most professionally run prosecutor's office in at least New England can go in with a plan to make Norfolk County a place where we recruit and retain the best prosecutors in the state, where we've restored confidence and integrity in the office, and it can be a district attorney's office that the residents of the county can be proud of.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, 60 seconds if you'd like for the last word. Oh, I'm
I
so
didn't go.
sorry. I apologize. I'm so hat focused on the last word. I apologize. Attorney Perkins, you are next.
That's okay.
You get 100 seconds.
I'll take them. So As I said earlier, I have 33 years of experience working with crime victims, and I've held several supervisory roles, both as a chief of the domestic violence unit in Suffolk County, as the supervisor of Dorchester District Court, and I've built my own practice. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people from all different walks of life. I think that those skills are incredibly important. But another one is that I have been a teacher. I have been a coach for high school students and college students. I've also my practice focuses on investigating sexual misconduct and discrimination in schools and workplaces, and that experience has given me a wealth of knowledge about how other systems resolve the same sorts of issues. Similarly, civil litigation, I spent a long time doing that, but still working in the same field. I'm the only candidate in this race with significant experience working with victims of crime, of the most terrible crimes you can imagine. I think all of that is important. I also think that leadership starts from the top. In my current practice, one thing I do often is give advice, give recommendations to high-level leadership at major schools and universities. And I teach them how to make their workplaces more friendly, more constructive, more collaborative, and to set the tone from the top that we really need. And finally, I have significant life experience that is relevant. I know from my own childhood experience that not everyone is dealt the same deck of cards. And I know what injustice feels like, and all of those things will inform my my supervision of the DA's office.
Thank you. And now the last word.
Sure, and I think a part of it might be a more humane approach to prosecution. Prosecutors are not accepted to this, but prosecutors and defense attorneys don't like to see their a defendant released and commit another crime and then be reincarcerated. Now, it's a system that doesn't work. So my vision, I guess, for the office too would be part of how do we reduce the recidivism so public safety generally is lower. I mean, it's higher public safety, but lower rates of crime versus just throw the book at them, incarcerate, do it again, and gotta do something to break that cycle. And I think a lot of what I can speak to and what my experience has been is how we can achieve that with what we get. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll start now with Attorney Lee for our next question.
Okay.
A lot of you have mentioned priorities that you would have and characteristics that you would bring to this work. And I'm going to ask you now a question specific to the Norfolk County DA's office today. What about that office today would you seek to strengthen, and what would you seek to change about that office?
A lot. One of the things that I intend to do, should I be elected, is to go in and study the structural organization of the office and see where there is a need of supervisory oversight. And from what I understand the office now, which consists of approximately 140 staff members, there needs to be a significant overhaul and restructuring of that office. I don't know if there's someone who is handling public records requests. My understanding is that the office is not timely in responding to FOIA requests, and there's a statutory requirement. So there needs to be a public records officer. There needs to be training, a chief of training in that office to train everyone, not just new assistant district attorneys, but consistent and continuing training. I don't know if there's a chief of the district courts. There definitely needs to be one because the district courts is the first level, the first entry level for a lot of crimes. And a lot of those crimes can be resolved easily through diversion, through treatment. And there's also a lot of young assistant district attorneys who start out in district court, and they need to be properly trained so that they can properly manage law enforcement officers with whom they work. There also needs to be a budget study in that office as well. There also needs to be a complete overhaul in leadership so that charging decisions are properly made and not flawed like we've seen in the last few years. Those would be the initial changes that I see that needs to be made in the office.
Thank you.
I think with just 90 seconds, I will focus on one thing and my number one priority upon taking office in January. I think after transitioning to a leadership role in the office, the first priority of my administration would be to identify every single case where there are victims and survivors and families who do not have answers and do not feel like they've received justice. and evaluate each one of those cases, task assistant district attorneys and staff to find those answers and to provide them to those victims, survivors, and families. Part of my accountability agenda, I have a comprehensive policy platform here, and was the first candidate in the race to come forward with any kind of detailed policy. Part of it is creating a real conviction integrity unit, creating a cold case unit, and ensuring that this district attorney's office is not going to be one where Sandra Birchmore's family is still looking for answers and where Sandra Birchmore is still listed on a death certificate as having committed suicide. It's not going to be a district attorney's office where John O'Keefe's family either doesn't know or hasn't gotten an answer from the DA's office for what happened, or if the DA's office has utterly failed to provide justice, it needs to revisit that case and figure out what happened and have a dialogue with John O'Keefe's family about what the facts actually are.
Thank you. Attorney Perkins.
Thank you. So one of the things I think that the current district attorney's office has, which I'm hearing from voters all over the place, is that the district attorney has done a very good job with drug cases and in diversion programs. I think that I would enhance and strengthen those. There's one drug court in Norfolk County, and I would support having more. I think in terms of challenges, I think we all know what many of those are. The first thing I would do is to audit the office in terms of supervision, what trainings are done, prosecution policies and protocols. I'd review decisions in significant cases, including the Sandra Birchmore case. And I would also collect feedback from staff members throughout the office, and I would also want to interview them when I first came in. I'd also be drafting a written conflict of interest policy and a policy on duty to report police misconduct and disclose exculpatory evidence. I would not accept campaign contributions from staff or police unions, and I'd publish officer-involved shooting reports and case dispositions on the website. I'd also do a lot more collaboration with community organizations. I think we can do a lot more work in developing programs that prevent crime and recidivism.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat.
Sure. For me, it would be twofold. One, I think you need to continually prosecute aggressively the violent offense cases that they have. It's my understanding they've been doing a fairly okay job doing that. I would enhance that, but the second fold would be to rebuild the public trust. I think after certainly Sandra Birchmore, Karen Reed debacle, and what happened to Justin Root, that there's a humongous problem with investigations at the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. To combat those changes, some of the changes I would implement would be reviewing any charges that have a minimum mandatory sentence, seeing what can be broken down, if anything, and checking out the facts the way not just police might interpret them, but how the district attorney's office might interpret them. Secondly, I would implement open discovery for defense attorneys to be able to get any and all information that the prosecutor's office has. I don't think anyone should go to trial or plea when they don't have all the information before them or be sandbagged with something, the day of trial, the 12th hour. And I think implementing a do not call list as far as police witnesses go, given a lot of the misconduct that's been coming out with the Massachusetts State Police and some of the communities in Norfolk County.
And for the last word, we'll turn to Attorney Lee. When I first asked you this question about whether you'd keep the same or change, you said a lot. So it's fitting that perhaps you have the 60 seconds to address anything that your colleagues have not so far that you want to see change or strengthen.
I just want to add, I also would involve the Norfolk County Defense Bar. They have the greatest experience in terms of working with prosecutors and defending their clients with charges. So I would like to get their input and actually hire defense attorneys if they want to join the prosecutor's office to be trainers or chief of the district courts, because again, they have the firsthand knowledge and experience of working with those courts, with those ADAs, and offering a fresh perspective as to how a district attorney's office should be operated.
Thank you. This next question, we're going to go first to Attorney Deitch. You mentioned earlier in your background, you have a history of prosecuting government officials when there's been misconduct. That's a good segue perhaps to this question, because one of the roles that you would have as district attorney is not just working with the police, government officials, but sometimes investigating and perhaps taking action when there's been police misconduct by them, and disclosing that, as we've heard too, to the defense bar, and making sure the public is aware. How would you approach that dual role of both working with the police and holding them accountable?
Thanks for the question. And this is something where I have experience that no other candidate in the race has. I've spent years prosecuting public officials and police officers who are in the small minority of members of law enforcement who break rules and break laws. But I've also had the privilege and honor of investigating those and other cases while standing shoulder to shoulder with members of local and state and federal law enforcement. And I see the look on the faces of the good cops when they uncover the conduct of the bad ones. And I think you're right. The question implies that it is another difficult needle to thread. But one key tenet of my policy agenda as district attorney will be to establish a first of its kind anti-corruption task force. There are details on my campaign website, but it will isolate a senior assistant district attorney in the office who will not be prosecuting other cases and will therefore be insulated with respect to investigations and prosecutions of corruption cases. We'll have a dedicated hotline where members of the public can call in with allegations of potential public corruption. And I think there's a way to thread that needle where we can effectively send a message to the people of Norfolk County: corruption is not tolerated here.
Thank you very much. Attorney Perkins, same question to you.
Thank you. Well, the very first experience I had in a prosecutor's office was when I was in law school, when I had an internship at the U.S. Attorney's Office under Ralph Martin, who was then assigned to investigate the conduct of the Boston police in the wake of the Carol Stewart murder. And so that was my first introduction to police misconduct. The following summer, I spent at the Manhattan DA's office as an intern in the Police Integrity Division. So police corruption is something that I take very seriously, and as an assistant district attorney and assistant attorney general, I also took very seriously. I think that most police officers are doing well and doing a good job, and that the ones who don't, who aren't doing the right thing, undermine the rest, the abilities and the credibility of the rest of them. We have to, as lawyers, we are responsible for making sure that all the evidence that is presented to court is good evidence. It is made in good faith, and we have to be able to hold the line and to confront. To both respect the work of police, but also to call them on their errors when they exist. And we just cannot be afraid to do that. And that's also why someone from outside the office has to be the next district attorney, because the relationships are simply too close after this long.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, you mentioned a moment ago that you would institute a do not call list for police officers who were found to have engaged in serious misconduct. What other measures would you take alongside that initiative as you exercise that dual role of working with and holding police accountable?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because I always say I'm not anti-police, I'm anti-bad police, and I would imagine that a lot of police officers, the ones who are out there protecting and serving and doing their job, also feel the same way. But in that same breath, these so-called bad police officers are also entitled to avail themselves to a defense against what might be a false allegation, and and until it can be proven through jurists or something along those lines, internal affairs, that something has gone awry, that they're also entitled not to be labeled bad cop. I certainly would take police misconduct extremely serious, because when the public loses trust in the police, the public also loses trust in the district attorney's office and everything that kind of follows that same line.
Thank you. Attorney Lee, how would you approach that dual role?
Again, I think it goes back to training. I think it's incumbent on assistant district attorneys to be well-trained and be able to identify misconduct when they see it, and to be encouraged to report it. A lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but I can think of few instances where law enforcement will bring a case where there's insubstantial evidence to go forward with the charge and wants the charge to go forward. And again, that's on the assistant district attorney to know that there's not enough evidence here to go forward, take it back, either no charge or do more work on it. So that goes with training as well. And it's also the responsibility of the district attorney's office to recognize that. With regards to misconduct, once it's reported or identified and reported, it should be brought to the chief or the police and reported to Post. Post has done a really good job in disciplining police officers and putting them on a list so that we provide it in discovery. And I've had experience before doing that at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, both identifying misconduct and reporting it as well. So it goes with training, it goes with the encouragement of reporting it, and it's training on both parts, both the assistant district attorney and as well as police officers knowing what they can and cannot do, what they should and should not be able to do.
Thank you. We'll provide you on this question the last word, Attorney Deitch.
Sure. I think on this topic, and it's an important one, I'll say that for the last 16 years, Michael Morrissey and his leadership team have created and maintained a two-tiered system in Norfolk County. If you know the right people or you're connected to the right people, you get special treatment in Norfolk County, and that should not be the case. That is a theme in the Sandra Birchmore case, where because a police officer might have been involved, the DA's office utterly failed to conduct any kind of real investigation. It's true in the Karen Reed case where, if there might be witnesses or other members of law enforcement either involved or privy to what happened, a blind eye gets turned by the DA's office. A two-tiered system is not acceptable, and it's not something that will be a part of my district attorney's office.
That's a good segue to this next question. Several of you have brought up the investigations into the death of John O'Keefe and Sandra Birchmore. Several of you have also talked about the concept of public trust and what you do to rebuild public trust where you see it lacking within the Norfolk DA's office. So for this next question, we will go first to Attorney Perkins. What lessons do you take from the investigations of John O'Keefe's death and of the death of Sandra Birchmore? And how would you use those experiences to inform your approach to high-profile cases?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the takeaways are that justice really matters. It is a fundamental aspect is a defining element of a democratic society, and when it goes wrong, it can affect all of us, not just the families involved, but we all are left questioning what our government is doing for us. I mean, if we cannot speak for those most vulnerable among us, we have no government at all. And so, I think that the way that I would handle high-profile cases would be what you have to do is to be as transparent as you can, as often as you can, because there are those moments when you cannot be transparent to protect people's privacy or the integrity of an investigation. And so when you can be transparent, you must be about every single thing, about how you make decisions in general, about how charges are made, how sentencing recommendations are thought about, publishing things like officer-involved shooting reports and criminal dispositions in criminal cases. All of those things, I think, are what will really are the way you have to handle them.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to be clear. I think a lot of the corners that were cut in the investigation into Karen Reed happen in every single case I've ever touched my hands on. And the only reason it doesn't get into the public view is because it's never reported on. Most of my clients are not wealthy white women who get taken advantage of with the police. A lot of my clients are indigent and people of color, and it's just an unfortunate fact that's happening. And it does upset me. It does make me sick that this does happen. But I think when it does happen on a wide scale, high profile case like it did in the case of Karen Reed, cutting corners, investigations not being completely done. And I know I touched upon it in my introduction about a system that values efficiency over taking the time to get things right. And it does have some real sad consequences, especially for the people who do get convicted. based on faulty evidence, faulty investigatory measures. And really, it can't be tolerated. And I think for it to be highlighted in the way that it had been does go a long way to raising awareness for other cases that the same misconduct and the same things happen in.
Thank you. Attorney Lee, what are the lessons from these investigations and how do you apply them to high-profile cases going forward?
So some of the questions I have resulting in the prosecution of Karen Reed is who approved the indictments? Who approved the prosecutor who went before the grand jury to seek the indictments that were later voted on? Was there a memo that supported the request for these indictments? Was there a summary of the facts that supported each and every one of the indictments sought by the ADA in the grand jury? Those are the questions I have, and those are the questions that we should not have when it comes to any case that's indicted in any county. Any case that's brought to the grand jury must be supported by probable cause. In fact, it should be supported by beyond a reasonable doubt, because if you cannot prove a case at trial, it should not be indicted. So that's my question, is what type of oversight existed, or exists, I should say, at the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office? Because based on what I know from the media, and I've never reviewed the case file, I only know what everyone else knows, there is a lacking of oversight, there's a lacking of supervision, there is a lacking of executive decisions in that office. And so that's the first thing I would consider. And that's the lessons that I think that the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office learned, is that there needs to be supervision, there needs to be oversight, there needs to be experience in reviewing these type of cases before they go to the grand jury for indictment.
Attorney Deitch, what are the lessons from your perspective and how do you apply them going forward, particularly in high-profile cases?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first. How do you handle high-profile cases? At bottom, like any other case, you follow the facts and the evidence, full stop. No shortcuts, no rushes to judgment, no drawing conclusions before all the evidence is collected in a particular case. You follow the facts and the law, and no one is above the law, period. I am proud and honored to be able to tell you that last week, members of Sandra Birchmore's family who have been fighting for justice for Sandra now for years, evaluated this race and decided to endorse my candidacy for district attorney, in part because they believe that I am the outside candidate who can come in and ensure that the facts and the evidence dictate prosecutorial decision-making in Norfolk County. And I think Jim raises a really good point. The Sandra Birchmore case and the Karen Reed case raise very serious questions about what's going on at this district attorney's office. But you also have to ask, what else has been going on over the last 16 years that we don't even know about? And I think one of the lessons that we've learned here is whether it's high profile, if it's high profile, the office has been exposed as a national embarrassment. But if it's not high profile, as Jim pointed out, we need to open the hood and look at the documents and figure out what else is going wrong, what else has gone wrong there.
Thank you. And Attorney Perkins, the last word to you.
Thank you. So one of the themes that I think runs through all of the controversial cases we've seen is that the decisions by the district attorney seem to have been driven by ego. And ego should play no role whatsoever in a district attorney's office. The district attorney has an ethical obligation to keep an open mind. That's another thing that we saw over and over again, was the failure to keep an open mind. Confirmation bias was all over the place. And even when new evidence appeared, the district attorney dug his heels in. That is completely wrong and should never have happened. And finally, and most importantly, the most devastating impact about both of those cases is that there is no justice ultimately for any of these families. And so, and that is the true travesty of the decisions made by this district attorney.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, you invited us during your remarks to think about whether or not high profile is maybe the wrong focus within the question, whether the issues that we saw in those cases that you all have raised perhaps appeared under the brightest spotlights, but that other cases have not enjoyed the same critical thinking. So my question that I'll begin with you is, where are the areas where the spotlight should be shown where it has not in Norfolk County in terms of the functioning and priorities of the District Attorney's Office?
So we do need to get back to, I guess, Adam mentioned me, so I'll mention him, the nuts and bolts of prosecution. I don't think just that in the general realm of it being a high profile case, whether that means it should be treated any differently than any other case that comes through the door. I think where it could be shown to at least maybe some improvement is the District Attorney's Office has an immense power to weed out any cases it wants to, prosecutorial discretion where it deems discretion necessary, and also overcharging. I think it's one of the dirtiest tricks in the book to overcharge just to try to move on a plea and get the win in your column and move on to the next case. But with the immense power, I think they have immense responsibility to weed out those cases that are that I would call garbage, and they're essentially weighing down the system in overworking not just prosecutors but defense attorneys as well. Cases that are clogging up the court system that could ultimately have just been either diverted or just not even filed at all. That's time.
Attorney Lee, same question to you. Where would you place a spotlight where it has not been placed outside of the high-profile cases that we've talked about?
I think that all cases should be given the same amount of attention, despite who the victims are, whether it's high profile or not. Cases should not be politicized, because I think one of the things that have been demonstrated through the Karen Reed trial is we forgot someone named John O'Keefe, and that a family lost a son, father, a brother, a friend. And that high-profile case overshadowed the tragic loss of someone in our community. So I think that all cases should be considered on the same level without politics involved. And the evidence should be considered in the same way, whether there is enough to indict, whether there is enough to bring to trial, and whether a jury will convict, regardless of whether the case could be used for political reasons, whether it's considered to be high profile or not.
I know in your remarks, Attorney Deitch, you mentioned treating those high-profile cases the same as you would any other case. Do you agree with the sentiment from Attorney Barakat that if the focus and spotlight was placed there, that we may see some of those same issues, or are even likely to see them?
I think the only conclusion that can be drawn based on the evidence we've all seen is that, yes, when we start looking at other cases, we're going to see other problems. But I do want to take the question in a slightly different direction, if I may. I think the part of the question is, where has the spotlight not been shown? And instead of just, I'm trying to run based on a positive vision for the future of the office. And I do think the spotlight hasn't been shown on an opportunity that exists in this moment for this office. An opportunity to make this office a beacon for the recruitment and retention of the best prosecutors in the state. An opportunity to make the DA's office one where the attorneys who work there and the staff who work there can be proud of where they work again. And I think a key component of that is electing a change candidate in this race. Someone who can come in from the outside, who's going to work as hard as he or she can to ensure that the future of the DA's office is a heck of a lot brighter than the last few years have been. And so I do see, despite all of kind of the negativity of the past few years, a real genuine opportunity to make this DA's office a great one.
So we'll hand the spotlight now to you, Attorney Perkins, and ask you where you shine it, perhaps somewhere that hasn't garnered as much attention as the cases we've talked about.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I would prioritize crimes of violence, abuse, and fraud, anything that involves real evil, because that is exactly what those crimes are. What I have seen in my own practice in the last 13 years is that we live in a pretty safe county, and that's great. But some of the worst crimes that we face are happening in our homes and at school. Something like 24%, in some recent survey in Massachusetts of Massachusetts teens, something like 24% of teens talk about having been stalked or having some other negative or domestic violence with their romantic partners as a teenager. That is incredibly dangerous for our society, as if we can't correct that sooner with better programming and teaching of students. Something like 60% of women and 40% of men have in Massachusetts have described having experienced sexual assault in their lifetime. That is a huge number of people who have experienced these kinds of crimes that have incredibly long-lasting impacts on people and on their productivity in society. I think we need to really work on those a lot. And specifically in the Norfolk DA's office, I've heard many, many reports from people in the last few years about experiences they've had in the DA's office that show me that we need to be far more trauma-informed in the way the district attorney's office investigates cases and prosecutes them for true justice.
Thank you. And the last word to you, Attorney Barakat.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just, keep pushing that you can decriminalize in your discretion, and you could also divert in your discretion, and that's shown by many studies to show to drop recidivism in crime. The number one contributor to recidivism is having a record in the first place. So if you can do what you can to avoid maybe first-time offenders from ever having a record in the first place, you're doing much more help to the community at large than you can by just throwing someone in jail. Now, 88% of inmates in Massachusetts are in there for low-level misdemeanors, nonviolent, and to give so much effort and dedication to that portion when you could use those resources to prosecute violent offenders doesn't make sense, not for this county.
For this next question, we'll move first to Attorney Lee. And this question centers around trust, the question of trust. We've discussed this in different aspects today. Trust in the criminal legal system varies widely across communities, different communities. What would you do to build and sustain trust, particularly in communities that are skeptical of the criminal legal system?
I think trust goes hand in hand with transparency. When you have a transparent office, you gain public trust. One of the first things I would do as district attorney is to visit all the 27 towns that are in Norfolk County. Have a presence, walk the neighborhoods, go talk at schools, meet parents, have a night out. I don't know if they still do that, but I know in Suffolk County, they used to have a night out, and I used to participate in that in Chinatown, which is where I grew up. And that engages the community. You have a connection with the community, and nothing, in my opinion, replaces face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact. And that's something that has not been happening in the current Norfolk County District Attorney. So I think going out to the community, meeting people, talking to people, establishing a bond and hearing what concerns them the most is the first step to gaining public trust. The second thing, as I said about transparency, is be open, follow the law. When somebody files a FOIA request, you should respond to it on a timely basis. And if you can't, ask for an extension. My understanding is that the current Norfolk County District Attorney's Office usually does not respond to FOIA requests. That's in violation of the Public Records Statute. So start doing that. So if you're responsive, then the public knows that, oh, okay, you have nothing to hide. This is an office that we can reach out, have a connection to. So I think that's really important for the community.
Thank you, Attorney Deitch. So we've heard from Attorney Lee about engaging with community partners, about transparency, respect in the records production process. What would you do to build trust, particularly amongst communities that may be skeptical of your office?
Yeah, and thank you for this question as well. It's going to be hard because Michael Morrissey and his leadership team have eroded the public's trust in this office. So it's just another reason why someone coming in from the outside is fundamentally necessary if a goal is to rebuild the public's trust in this DA's office. I address this, and I have this conversation frequently with voters. I've now had that literally thousands of conversations with folks across Norfolk County over the past few months, and they feel almost to a person that the DA's office is closed to them. It touches on the two-tiered system that I talked about before, but it also resonates in a different way. Voters and citizens are not going to trust a DA's office that they think is closed to them. So in addition to holding town halls across the 28 cities and towns in Norfolk County, in addition to introducing accountability to the public as a fundamental principle of my DA's office, we're also going to implement something called data-driven prosecution, which is as obvious as it sounds and unfortunately is not a 90-second concept. But collecting, analyzing, and publishing data will enable the DA's office to demonstrate over time what it's doing, why it's doing it, and also how to measure success. Engaging with the public on all of that will be critical to rebuilding trust.
Thank you. Attorney Perkins.
Thank you. So first of all, I agree with Adam that, with Attorney Deitch, sorry, that cultural change takes time. I've seen this in other major institutions that have suffered from serious crises. It does take time, and so people are going to have to be a little bit patient, but it doesn't mean we give up. We keep going, we keep doing the job the way it's supposed to be done, and eventually the trust will be regained. It also will be regained by giving victims and witnesses, maximizing their agency, maximizing the support that they get in the court system by showing empathy and respect to every single person who comes before the district attorney's office and interacts with the district attorney's office, and being accessible and available to the people that we serve, not just in one town or city, but all 28 and to all 730,000 of us. Finally, I think that there's an organization in Franklin called the SAFE Coalition, and it's an organization it's a coalition of community agencies that meet to discuss and help support individuals in the community with any variety of problems. So it's schools, medical centers, mental health providers, substance abuse disorders, and they all work together to try to support people in the community with that before crimes occur. And I would like to expand those kinds of programs all over the county.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat.
I believe Attorney Lee said it right on the head, transparency and accountability. I don't think it's just something we need to strive for. It's going to be something that the public absolutely 100% expects. And to build and sustain that trust, I think it'll be real important to do whatever we can to show that we care about racial disparity in charging decisions, especially if judges give any racially disparate sentences out to defendants. The DA's office should and could show that they care about the community, not just for the victims of the crime, but also for the families of the accused and the incarcerated, because in many times you're now caging the sole breadwinner of the home. You might leave a poor mother with 3 kids and no income. These are collateral consequences that happen in every prosecution, and it's sad, but these are also the victims of the crimes of the defendants. And your decisions, when you do make them, they have to be founded in credibility. You have to come off as credible. You can't just make a show like you're doing something to look good on paper. You have to be very genuine about what you implement.
Thank you. And the last word to you, Attorney.
I also want to add that Norfolk County has the largest Asian community in all of the Commonwealth. And that community resides in Brookline, Quincy in its majority, Weymouth, Braintree, and Randolph. And in my discussions, numerous ones with the Asian community, there's no trust of the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, mainly because of cultural and language barriers. As I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Chinatown. My parents are immigrants. I speak 2 languages. And there's always a distrust of law enforcement when there are cultural and language barriers. And that is one of my goals when I become district attorney, is to remove those cultural and language barriers so that not only the Asian communities, but the Cape Verdean community, the Spanish-speaking community, they feel that they can go to the district attorney's office when there is a threat of public safety in their communities, their neighborhoods, their home, et cetera. So I think that's another way to gain trust with the community, is understanding the cultural and language barriers and removing them.
Thank you. As we move to Attorney Deitch for the next question, I'd like to pick up on points that many of you mentioned during the course of your answers, which is engagement with community partners. Attorney Perkins talked to us about the SAFE Coalition. Attorney Lee, you talked about night outs, going on walks, seeing parents, going to schools, engaging with Asian community in Norfolk County. So the question I'd like to begin with for Attorney Deitch and the panel here is, which community partners have you engaged with or will you engage with to help you understand what changes you should make to improve your office?
Yeah. So let me step back for a second and underscore how important the district attorney's partnerships across the board are. And that includes partnerships with other law enforcement agencies, whether it's local police departments, whether it's the Massachusetts State Police, whether it's the Justice Department and federal agencies. And I think one thing that I hear from voters, I hear from members of law enforcement, the district attorney's office to date in Norfolk County has failed in maintaining those kinds of partnerships. And I think when that happens, the public suffers, and public safety isn't protected in the same way. And part of it might be the function of some of the cases we've already talked about. Part of it is the function of the leadership team at the DA's office in many different facets, not engaging with federal partners, with state partners, with local law enforcement partners. And I think that's a priority that will be critical for the next DA to rebuild those partnerships. We talk about the World Cup happening this summer and the law enforcement challenges that something like the World Cup presents. It requires district attorneys' offices, police departments, the state, it requires people working together. And that's something that hasn't been happening the way that it should in Norfolk County, and something that will improve under my leadership.
Attorney Perkins, we come to you. Which community groups have you reached out to or will you reach out to learn how you can better work to improve the office that you would run?
So I've reached out to a number of substance abuse or substance disorder organizations, domestic violence organizations, mental health organizations, youth organizations. And I think that I would, at the very beginning, I would do a listening tour of all of the critical stakeholders in the community, police departments, schools in each town, and all of these other groups that we've mentioned, affinity groups, based on culture, LGBTQ plus, language, everything that you can imagine, to kind of take a 360-degree feedback survey from the community about what really mattered, business owners, and local residents too. And I think that's something that I would continue to do, to continue to have, to meet with people on a regular basis from those institutions.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, same question to you.
So there's a lot of restorative justice groups out available. There's not one, two in particular, but victims of crimes don't always just want to see someone locked up. Sometimes that could even exacerbate the problem. They could get out. They could be more upset that they just spent time incarcerated over something they did to this individual. So, the reflection that goes into restorative justice, the accountability and the potential mental health treatment are huge factors in the harm reduction benefits of restorative justice groups. But also, I was brainstorming political legal services, prisoners legal services of Greater Boston. A lot of time they help inmates reintegrate into society when their time is up in jail or the House of Correction or state prison. Will these individuals who come out of jail be educated? Will there be job opportunities for them? Is there going to be housing for them? Because if there's none of these things for them, they're just going to turn back to a life of crime, and they're going to reoffend, and they're going to end up right back in prison. It's not going to do our community any favors.
Thank you. Attorney Lee.
Before I decided to run for Norfolk County District Attorney, I serve on the board of Dove. Dove is a nonprofit organization in Norfolk County and serves Norfolk County and aims to end domestic and partner violence. So I sit on the board, so I have a very good understanding of the nature and cases of domestic and partner violence in Norfolk County. It's a wonderful nonprofit, so I'm going to give it a shout out. It offers advocacy, support, and education about domestic and partner violence. I've also reached out to a lot of the police chiefs in the county so that I can hear from them in terms of what their communities are concerned about. For example, what is concerning in Quincy is very different than in Medway, or Millis, or Medfield, or Wrentham, or Milton, which is where I live. So every town has its own unique concerns. And I think it's really important as the district attorney to understand what concerns Quincy and the Chinese community there could be very different to the community in Stoughton or Wrentham. So I think that's my goal, is to meet with every police chief before September 1st and understand those community needs.
Thank you. We'll turn now for the last word to you, Attorney Deitch, and lead with some of the principles we heard. This initiative, going to meet with community groups, is it an ongoing initiative, as Attorney Perkins pointed out to us throughout the course of the administration you did?
I realize now that I basically used my first 90 seconds on this question with a non-responsive answer, so I'm glad this is one where I have the extra 60 seconds. I likewise reached out to community leaders and elected officials across the county, both before and after I announced, including people who work in the victim services space and mental health organizations and religious organizations. I've reached out to all of the police chiefs. And I do think, to answer the finer point that you put on the question, these are continuing relationships and critical partnerships, because the district attorney's office does a lot more than prosecute criminals and maintain public safety. These kinds of relationships are what actually make our communities safe. It's not arresting and prosecuting every criminal. It is these relationships and supporting what a lot of these kinds of community organizations do every day.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on a principle that Attorney Barakat mentioned as we move next to Attorney Perkins. You mentioned restorative justice. Our criminal process seminar here, the prosecution defense students had the opportunity last week to visit MCI Norfolk and to see the way in which incarcerated men there and their community partners who engage with them in circles are instituting restorative justice and using that as a process to heal and to take accountability. Is that a principle, restorative justice, that would be important to you? And would you be willing as well to travel to MCI Norfolk to see what they're doing there in a location that has really been one of the bastions of that principle?
Yeah, I really agree with restorative justice. Most of the people who talk about it, or most of the studies that have been done, really talk about its benefits for criminal defendants. But honestly, my work has shown me, working with hundreds of victims, the number one thing that victims want is acknowledgement and validation of the wrong and the harm caused. And so, and there are a few district attorneys around the country who are using it to benefit victims in violent crime cases. It is amazing as a prosecutor when you're trying to negotiate penalties and in civil litigation, when you're trying to negotiate settlements, that the thing that is the most hard to get is for somebody to say, I did something bad and I am really sorry. So if you can get that, it is worth a tremendous amount. And I know that there are pilot projects, I think in Dorchester maybe, that for restorative justice. I understand that they are going well, but I think that actually it's the defense bar who has some reticence about it sometimes. But I'm definitely open to anything that makes that empowers victims of crime and makes them feel like they actually are made as whole as can possibly be made as a result of a crime.
Thank you. So we'll turn now to you, Attorney Barakat. You opened this question, this idea, so I want to return to you. What is your view of restorative justice? Have you been to MCI Norfolk? Would you go?
I actually have been to MCI Norfolk along with some colleagues and a district court judge in a jurisdiction where I do practice in front of, and I'll be honest, I mean, it was completely eye-opening. I mean, these older adults, a lot of them were lifers, and we're doing a lot of great work in showing the other inmates who might not have a life sentence that there is another path. I mean, you could take it for what it is, but I'm a stern believer of, you're not defined by, or you shouldn't be defined by the worst thing you've ever done. And I think it's a philosophy that a lot of these inmates have taken. And even just think of yourself 5, 6, 10 years ago, you're not the same person you were then. And time in these carceral settings, whether for better or worse, can change you as well. But I think programs like restorative justice, especially at state prisons, are really tipping the scale that, these folks can get out, be different people, and learn from, what did their harm actually do versus I've put in my time, I'm done, and I'm absolved of what it is that I did.
Attorney Lee, would the process of restorative justice have a place under District Attorney Lee?
Yes, I am a huge proponent of restorative justice. That was a big program at the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office under District Attorney Dan Conley at the time, and I did participate in the circle twice while I was there. So I have been to MCI Norfolk as part of the restorative justice program. And I am a big proponent, and it would be something I would implement in Norfolk County.
You ask a bunch of Democrats if they like restorative justice, you're going to get a bunch of yeses. So I'll add to that for sure. I think restorative justice is at the back end of a case and can have tremendous effect on both the defendant and the victim and victims' families. At the front end, and I hope we get to talk about this today, I think diversion and treatment are ways to address all kinds of low-level, first-time offense type crime. And I think instituting these kinds of concepts in Norfolk County, or embracing the ones as they exist and making them stronger, will be incredibly important. We want a smart, modern district attorney's office, and that requires diversion and treatment as options on the front end. It absolutely includes restorative justice on the back end in cases where it's appropriate. I've spent myself a good amount of time in prisons, mostly in the setting where I used to visit clients when I worked for the Innocence Project. And I have seen some of the worst aspects of that and some of the best. A dear friend of mine helps to run the restorative justice program at the federal courthouse. And I know through her just how important and powerful it can be. It's something that would absolutely be part of my district attorney's office.
Thank you. And last word to you, Attorney Perkins.
One thing I also wanted to mention from one of the last questions was was emerging adult courts. That is a trending topic, and I think that that's an amazing idea because the bulk of crimes are committed by youth ages 18 to 24. And I think in Springfield they have a program called ROCA, which is a nonprofit where it's basically diversion programs, but with significant rigorous accountability measures so that the people who are in this program have to get jobs, go to school, get housing, so that they become productive citizens and do not commit crime, which makes us all safer.
Thank you. The program as well that exists in Suffolk County as well, ROCA. I want to move on now. I know you're going to be shocked that we are not as far through the questions as I would like as we ended the prepared questions portion. I do want to ask you one more before we move to some of the questions that have been submitted by members of our law school community. And we'll go to Attorney Barakat first, which is, when you walk into a courtroom in Norfolk County, do you see racial and ethnic disparities?
I think you do, and it does all stem from socioeconomical problems, and I don't think you can kind of avoid that. I think it's implicitly biased staff at courts. I think it's practitioners that are not aware of their implicit bias, and I think it's also something that needs to be addressed. I know folks have tried to address it, have come up short. So it's certainly a hot topic that the more you can get people to self-identify and agree that yes, there is racial disparities in the courts within Norfolk County, to the tune of something of you know, 50 plus, you know, African American defendants to the small portion size that African Americans make up Norfolk County. So, until you're ready to address that, you're not going to get other folks on board who haven't yet addressed that.
Attorney Lee, what do you see when you walk in courts in Norfolk County?
So I have walked through into courts in Norfolk County. When I was an assistant district attorney in Suffolk County, I led many complex and lengthy wiretap investigations. And a lot of times those investigations went into Norfolk County. So I would have to use the Norfolk County grand jury to indict arrests stemming from Braintree, Quincy, Randolph, Weymouth, Milton, et cetera, many towns in Norfolk County. And there was a huge difference using the grand jury in Norfolk County. My recollection is it is primarily white. I don't remember seeing any color in that grand jury. I don't remember seeing any color in Norfolk Superior Court or Quincy District Court, other than the people behind the box and lockup. So yes, racial disparity exists, and I think people oftentimes forget because we are in Norfolk County, but we have to remember that towns like Milton, Quincy, Brookline, and Dedham border Suffolk County. They border Mattapan, Hyde Park. They border, to some extent, Roxbury into that particular area. And with that brings in people who identify themselves as people of color, and that comes into Norfolk County. So I think Norfolk County does suffer from racial disparity in terms of crimes being charged, perhaps in sentencing. I have not studied that, but from what I've seen, yes, it does exist.
Attorney Dyke, same question to you.
My answer is yes. And it's, before I decided to run, I spent time in the district courts in Quincy and Dedham and Rentham, because most of my experience has taken place in federal court. And what I saw there in terms of racial disparity is what I've seen in almost every criminal courtroom I've been in my career, including the federal courthouse in Boston. And there are racial disparities. Some of it is socioeconomic, and none of it is okay. And there are ways to thoughtfully evaluate what an office does and try to right any kind of racial disparity that does exist. It requires thoughtful, data-driven leadership. It involves things like effective diversion programs and treatment in cases where substance use disorder or mental health issues are the underlying cause of criminal conduct. Incarceration is not increasing public safety. It's actually making it worse. And recidivism rates for folks who are committing crimes because of substance use disorder or because of a mental health issue, the recidivism rates after incarceration are higher for them than otherwise. And I think there are ways to attack these kinds of issues with thoughtful, forward-thinking leadership that we need in Norfolk County.
Thank you. Attorney Perkins, same question to you. What do you see when you walk in courtrooms in Norfolk County?
Oh, definitely disparities between race, among race and socioeconomic class. I think that the district attorney's office should be the best law firm in the county, and that the way that we do that and the way that we also help address racial disparities is by having a district attorney's office that reflects the diversity of the community that we serve. I think that is also the way that we get the most diverse talent, and that's the way we get the most diverse perspectives. I also would absolutely make sure that every single member of the office is trained in implicit bias and in the avoidance of confirmation bias. And I would be very interested in analyzing prosecution outcomes to evaluate disparate impact on particular groups and why that's happening. It may or may not be related to anything fundamentally wrong in what we're doing, but we need to know what are the reasons that this is happening. So I definitely favor all that.
Attorney Barakat, as we move to you for the last word, how do we approach changing the problem that we've all identified here, or beginning to, that monumental task?
Well, it's an interesting inquiry because I know I mentioned about implicit bias, but the more you walk into courts within Norfolk County, the more, if you check the docket, you might see that there's some Commonwealth versus Long litigation happening. And, that as a defender signals to me that maybe there's definitely some non-race-based or race-based reason for stopping someone, for searching someone. And the more we see these long motions, long litigation, the more you start to realize maybe it's the system that is bringing defendants here in the first place. Maybe it's I don't like to throw the word racist out, but it could be a racist cop who stopped somebody and now they're in court, and when they don't stop people that they don't stop white people at the same rates.
Thank you. The long litigation being a reference to bringing a claim of a violation of equal protection rights in the way in which police make decisions to selectively enforce the law. I give you 60 seconds on a question that could probably be answered in an hour, so I appreciate your willingness to engage with me.
Sure.
I want to move now to some of the questions that have been submitted by our audience members. The first one of those, and we'll go first to you, Attorney Lee. As District Attorney, what steps will you take to ensure that immigration status does not impact a defendant's right to due process within the criminal justice system?
That should have no bearing whatsoever. Everyone is entitled to constitutional rights, not just citizens of the United States, but residents. So it should not be a factor at all. It's not a consideration. Everyone should be treated equally, entitled to the protections of the 14th Amendment. And for us, it would be Article 14 under the Massachusetts Constitution. So no effect at all. Again, it comes down to training. For all the assistant district attorneys, it's not a consideration. Everyone should be treated the same. And immigration status has no bearing whatsoever on prosecution as a victim. Not a factor at all. And it shouldn't be.
Same question to you, Attorney.
Yeah, with due process rights being one of the founding principles, not just of our court system, but our Constitution, the immigration issues are something I think we all get asked about quite a bit. And those due process rights are integral to a democracy and integral to the system that we're all operating in. Immigration status should not affect how a person proceeds through the court system and whether they are entitled to rights that everyone should have. I think the thing that I get asked about the most in the immigration context right now is, well, what are you going to do about ICE? And maybe that's a future question, and I don't want to derail my answer to this, but I think I will say DA's offices and local law enforcement should be focused on local issues and keeping our communities safe. And we'll talk about ICE some more, but I think I agree with Macy, immigration status should not affect whether a person is entitled to those kinds of rights as they proceed through the court system.
What is your view, Attorney Perkins? Same question, how immigration status plays or does not play a role in the way in which your office will prosecute cases?
Right, it would not play any role in how my office would prosecute cases, but I am very concerned about the chilling effect that is happening right now, and that could continue to happen, of people being afraid to report crime or testify as witnesses or report to court to be prosecuted for crime because of their immigration status. I'm concerned about federal interference with local prosecutions because that's already been happening. And I'm concerned about the use of excessive force by federal agents and warrantless arrests. I support the PROTECT Act, which is now pending before the legislature. And I would also ensure that a staff member was assigned in my office to assist victims of domestic violence with obtaining U visas, which is a visa that is permitted specifically for people who are cooperating with investigations and prosecutions of domestic violence.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, same question to you.
Yeah, and while it's sad, I feel that the immigrant clients that I work for, along with every other immigrant defendant, they need to be fully informed of the risks they are taking by showing up to court. It shouldn't work that way, bless you. And it also should be more of a safe haven. I don't think ICE has any role whatsoever at our courts. There's folks there for state crime and state civil offenses, And as Attorney Perkins said, sometimes they're even afraid to show up as a witness. I've been a witness personally to watching ICE remove a person from a courtroom. I've watched them remove people from the street right outside the courthouse. And, it's sad that maybe a working father who also just happens to be an undocumented immigrant is walking around with a warrant for unregistered motor vehicle because they're too scared to show up at a courthouse and pay a fine. And it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen here. It shouldn't happen anywhere in this country.
Attorney Lee, will give you the last word because you began on this subject. Also, in your answer, if you want to pick up on any of the points made by your colleagues about the interaction between ICE and the business of the court, be eager to hear your thoughts.
I think the only thing I would add is that as district attorney, the best thing that I can possibly do is to educate the residents of Norfolk County in knowing what their rights are. In other words, an ICE agent or no one, really no law enforcement agent can stop your car without reasonable suspicion. They can't ask you to exit a car or your house without probable cause or without a judicial warrant. They certainly cannot enter your house without a warrant or without your consent and without probable cause. And I think that education to the immigrant community, for the immigrant community, is really important so they understand their rights and they can assert them. And again, where there are cultural and language barriers involved, that's something the district attorney's office should be removing so that they can connect with the immigrant community and train them and educate them on what their rights are to prevent any ICE actions or fear of their immigration status.
Thank you. And we have about 15 more minutes before we're going to give everyone the chance for a closing statement. We'll have a different order for that. But the next question that I wanted to present to you also comes from our audience. It draws on a principle that Attorney Barakat mentioned earlier in terms of incarceration rates. Attorney Barakat talked about those rates here in the U.S. As compared to other countries and how elevated they are with respect to other places. The question reads, what are your views on current Massachusetts incarceration rates and reentry programs? And do you have any programs or goals to improve alternatives to incarceration and greater reentry services? So that's an action-packed question, but it revolves around what are your views on incarceration rates? How do we improve reentry so people aren't coming back?
And it's an important question too. I don't want to repeat things I've already said, but I think prioritizing at the front end of cases, diversion and treatment for nonviolent first-time offenders is an important, necessary step. I think on the back end, something that I would institute, and I alluded to this a little bit with recidivism rates for folks who deal with substance use disorder or mental health issues who are incarcerated, ensuring that they have those defendants the treatment and transitional help they need on the back end to reintegrate into communities. And I think in the cases where we are incarcerating folks who are dealing with those kinds of issues, that is the only solution, or you will get repeat offenders. So I think that's something that the DA's office can actually play a big role in, that my DA's office certainly would. I think the broader question about mass incarceration, the reality is it is a problem across the country. I bet there are a few people who disagree about that in this room, and it's a problem in Massachusetts. Our incarceration rates as a country compared to others are insane and hard to wrap your mind around. But I do think thoughtful prosecutors at the front end of cases are the solution. We are on the front lines of solving that problem, and that's something that we can do and can do better in Norfolk County.
Thank you. And Attorney Perkins, same question to you. Your views on incarceration rates in Massachusetts, and do you have programs or goals to improve alternatives to incarceration and greater reentry services?
So, well, first of all, I think that our incarceration rates in Massachusetts are actually fairly low. I don't think that it's not that easy to go to jail in Massachusetts, and I also agree that that incarceration should be reserved for the most violent offenses, that just makes sense. At the same time, of course, we know that 95% of people are going to return to the community, and therefore, as district attorney, the goal is anything that improves public safety is something that we have to consider. I also want to balance that though with services for victims of crime. So because those are still fairly limited, and so I just want to be careful to be doing both. But certainly reentry programs make a lot of sense, because a happy and productive person is a safe person who will not commit crime.
Let me ask one follow-up.
Sure.
I know you mentioned that incarceration rates in Massachusetts, perhaps, or in Norfolk County, are not as high as you would expect or would exist under your direction. Would the under a District Attorney Perkins, would there be more people incarcerated in Norfolk County?
Well, really, that's up to the judge. But no, I mean, I also believe in the sentencing guidelines. I think that those are, that they are generally reasonable because they offer a wide range. Every case is different and has to be evaluated individually on its own merits. Sometimes a case looks incredibly serious and terrible, and then when you get into it, it is actually not as egregious as you'd think. But the converse can also be true. So I think it's just really a matter of as we're taught in criminal law, in law school, the punishment should be the least restrictive method to address the offense. And I definitely agree with rigorous programs that give accountability without over incarceration. I think there's no benefit to society in over incarcerating or over punishing, or overcharging for that matter. Yes.
Thank you. And Attorney Barakat, we'll move to you now. I know you brought up incarceration rates earlier in this program. Where do you see them, and how do we improve upon making sure people don't come back to jail, been to jail?
Well, Massachusetts is one of the lowest incarceration rates in the United States, but in my opinion, it's still too high. Like I said, there's more people incarcerated in Massachusetts than all of Europe, to the tune of about $75,000 per inmate per year, which could be used on the housing crisis, could be used on mental health treatment, could be used on substance use disorder treatment. Now, when the data says that incarceration increases recidivism, I think it should be a last resort incarceration then in that case, at least for nonviolent offenders. You have folks who are nonviolent offenders who end up incarcerated and who are traumatized by violence within the prisons. They, in many cases, for lack of better terms, learn to be better criminals while in jail, and they don't have any, substantive resources to help them re-enter when they leave. So, with all that being said, it should be really seen as a last resort, and there are folks who that's all you can do is incarcerate them, and I'm talking about high crime, high violence situations, and the sad fact about it is that data also shows that people who are committing violent crimes also themselves at one point or another were a victim of violent crime.
Attorney Lee, what are your thoughts on this issue?
So I think when the question of incarceration is twofold. So you have incarceration for those who've been convicted of a crime, and that's relatively low in Massachusetts. But then the other issue is those who are held on pretrial detention because there's cash bails and they're unable to make the cash bails. And that is an issue, that's a county-specific issue, because I know in Suffolk County, South Bay is typically overcrowded. The Norfolk County Sheriff's Department, it's similar because of those who cannot make cash bails pending trial. So I think that issue, there's twofold. And I think when it comes to cash bail, as a district attorney, I will implement policies of when to ask for cash bails and when not to. Chapter 276, Section 58, recognizes that personal recognizance is the assumption when requesting bail. And there are a lot of factors when a cash bail should be imposed. But I think that removing that will relieve some of the pretrial detention, which is causing the overcrowding in many counties, even in Norfolk and as well as Suffolk County. In terms of reentry programs, there's a lot. I know personally from Mass Health that those who are set for pretrial for release, they are ensured that they are in Mass Health, that they're getting health care. We need to also ensure that there's employment in place so that when there's reentry, we can guarantee success.
Thank you. And Attorney Deitch, we'll go to you for the last word. And because you're going last and these questions are getting more difficult, we'll pick up on a point that Attorney Lee mentioned also. If you want to incorporate it, you don't have to. which is the role that pretrial incarceration plays in incarceration and how bail can have the effect of holding people, particularly those without means, if you have any thoughts there.
So I have 60 seconds to address
60
bail reform in
seconds.
Massachusetts.
That's right. Only 60 seconds.
Can I actually go in a
Yeah.
different direction? I think solving issues relating to mass incarceration are important. I will say, though, to bring things home a bit, when we're talking about the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, we're also talking about an office that has failed to investigate and prosecute some of the most violent crimes we've seen. And before we get to the issue of mass incarceration, when we're talking about a police officer murdering a 23-year-old woman, we should be investigating that case and prosecuting that case in Norfolk County. We should not be letting the U.S. Attorney's Office step in to fix the failures of this DA's office. And there are crimes like murder, like that murder, where incarceration is 100% appropriate.
I believe we have time likely for one more question before we move to closing statements. We'll go to Attorney Perkins first. This is a question on about civil asset forfeiture, the taking of real property or money in connection with the prosecution of a criminal case. And here's how the question is worded. Massachusetts has been determined to have one of the most severe civil asset forfeiture laws in the country. What is your position on reforming these laws? I suppose the question presumes a position, or do you think they should be reformed, or what role does civil asset forfeiture play under District Attorney Perkins' administration?
Well, I can't say that I am super familiar with the asset forfeiture law. I understand the concept, and I know that in many communities, and including in Norfolk County, asset forfeiture proceeds are used to support community endeavors like substance abuse disorder programs. In one instance I just heard about today, they also were used to provide electronic systems for courtrooms so that trials could be better and use greater technology. I guess my concern is more about the good faith basis on which some of the asset forfeitures may be made. But it does make sense that if you are taking proceeds of a crime to put that money back into the community as a concept. I'm not certain what the level of ethics, I guess, in the way our law particularly works.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat, I don't know if through personal experience in your involvement in Norfolk County or views on the system more broadly, do you have a view about how you would approach civil asset forfeiture as District Attorney?
Well, I think it should be reasonably related to the crime if they're going to, seek the assets. Quite like any other, program they roll out. It's very racial disparate and immigrant disparate. You got police departments or district attorneys' offices seizing more assets of people who might not be showing up to court with an attorney to object to the taking of their property. But I don't think there shouldn't be a blanket rule that there was a car parked in their driveway of a drug bust, so we can also just seize the car as well. I think it needs to be more ironclad. It needs to have this particular car was used during this crime, and we're gonna seize that as part of the civil forfeiture.
Thank you. Attorney Lee, same question to you. What is your position on civil asset forfeiture laws?
I have a lot of experience with asset forfeiture as the former head of the narcotics unit at Suffolk County, and I am a proponent of it for high-level drug trafficking, where numerous amounts of cash were seized and they were forfeited through a civil lawsuit, so not with the criminal case, to ensure integrity of the forfeiture of these assets. These assets are really important, mainly because when you're talking about a large-scale drug trafficking organization, their assets help dismantle that DTO, drug trafficking organization. And those monies are then used to bring it back to the community. So for example, in Suffolk County, if you go to any of the criminal session courtrooms, all those courtrooms are outfitted with modern screens for the jury, for the judge, for the prosecutor. Those are all asset forfeiture monies that were seized from wiretap investigations. Those monies were also given back to the community through grants. The community is invited to submit grant applications, and the district attorney will then award grants to many different community organizations, neighborhood organizations. So I am a proponent of asset forfeiture, but particularly for high-level narcotic cases, and that they are to be done so through a civil complaint and not with a criminal case, so that it ensures integrity and accountability of any assets forfeited.
Thank you. Attorney Deitch.
Yeah, I agree that civil asset forfeiture is an important tool. The U.S. Attorney's Office, where I worked, has a robust civil asset forfeiture unit, although the U.S. Attorney's Office, unlike the DA's office, doesn't get to keep and utilize a portion of the proceeds. I think it's particularly important in this DA's office when we're talking about a budget and limited resources, and where in the past couple of years, $566,000 in taxpayer money was spent hiring an outside prosecutor to do a job we all assumed the DA's office should be doing itself, or where $400,000 of taxpayer money was spent hiring an expert to do I don't know what in the second Karen Reed trial. So I do think civil asset forfeiture is a good tool. My impression, actually, despite what I just said, is that the Norfolk DA's office has done a good job at least allocating asset forfeiture money to really good causes. And I'd want to continue that and strengthen that under my leadership.
Thank you. And we'll provide the last word before we go on this, or any other subject you'd like to bring up to you, Attorney Perkins. It's only fair because I skipped you earlier.
Oh.
The first question, we'll give you the last word, 60 seconds, anything you'd like to discuss.
Oh, anything. Yeah, I switching away from asset forfeiture, I just think the role of the district attorney is so important in every community. The stakes are often life and death. They have lifelong consequences. Whatever decisions you make, and the crime itself obviously has those consequences. This is a really serious job, and I hope that the community takes it as seriously too, and that the voters really look at what we're doing.
Thank you. We have a different order for closing. Closing remarks. We're going to start with Attorney Lee, and then we'll have Attorney Barakat, followed by Attorney Perkins and Attorney Dyke last. So we'll start with you, Attorney Lee. I think we said 60 seconds for closing remarks. No pressure.
No pressure. I think all of us here at this table can try a case to verdict, but that is not a necessary characteristic for a district attorney. What's required of a district attorney is someone who has proven leadership, managerial skills that can effectively manage and lead an office. Someone who can manage a budget, someone who can hire, can discipline, can set high standards. And I'm that person. I'm the only one here sitting at this table that has a proven record of extensive managerial and leadership skills of a large-scale public-facing office. And that is what Norfolk County needs. Not a political figurehead, not someone who has been immersed in the county on a political scale, but someone who has a proven job record. And that is who I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Barakat.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. I don't want to be seen as kind of like the radical candidate. Everything I've said today is backed up by statistics and studies that were done by people who are much, much more smarter than I am. And I'm kind of just a regular guy. I appreciate all of you for being here today and taking part in this forum. I'm joined today by Laura, my beautiful wife in the back. And me and her have two girls that we raised, two young girls. And I don't want my kids growing up in a lawless county that is overrun by crime and drug use. I want my kids to grow up in a county that's forward-looking and a county that's humane and that treats people with dignity and gives them the due process rights that they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Perkins.
One of the things I have enjoyed the most in visiting all 28 towns of the county in the past 2 years is seeing seeing the hundreds of people who do volunteer work all in their communities, whether it's by serving on select boards or finance committees or coaching Little League. And I have been so inspired by all of that. That, I believe, in our current national situation is incredibly important. I think that those people insisting on decency and fairness and respect for all of us is truly our superpower. And I think that I will be able to, given the endorsements I have from industry professionals, local electeds, and community leaders, more than 24, all over the county, I think that I have built those relationships and that I will be able to build that trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, the last word to you, Attorney Deitch, if you could just synthesize every question that we've had so far in 60 seconds. Go.
So bail reform again?
Go. Last word to you, closing remarks, whatever you want to say.
First of all, thank you again for being here with us and for inviting us here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to be able to sit with these qualified candidates and talk about the future of something that we care obviously very deeply about. I think in this race, I have a completely unique perspective and a completely unique set of experiences that meets this unique moment. I am the only candidate who's ever been a federal prosecutor. I am the only candidate in this race who specializes in public corruption cases. I'm the only candidate who has prosecuted police officers and public officials here in Norfolk County. I'm the only candidate who spent years working for the Innocence Project and seeing the hardest cases from both sides. And I think right now, for this job, in this moment, that is what we need in Norfolk County. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you. I want to give a big round of applause. Before I turn the program back over for final closing remarks to Amanda Taylor, our amazing director of the Rappaport Center here, I just want to thank all of you and just to highlight something that I found to be meaningful to me, which was just in meeting with all of you. I know we've never met before today, and seeing everyone in Stewart Hall and we are together, I was just struck by the respect and collegiality that you bring to one another. And the tone, the same tone that you bring to this debate. I think that is so wonderful and refreshing. It's really been a pleasure to get to meet you and to learn more about you today. And with that, another big thank you to Alexis Anderson for helping us. To Amanda Taylor, who helped to make all this possible for today.
Thank you. My name is Amanda Taylor. I'm the Executive Director for the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy. On behalf of our Faculty Director, Patricia McCoy, our Center Assistant, Alexis Albert, the Rappaport Center community and the Rappaport Foundation and BC Law, I want to thank all of you, the candidates, for participating today, but really for modeling, as Steve suggested, really the kind of substantive and respectful and thoughtful conversation that we want all of our students to aspire to. I also want to thank Steve for doing an incredible job moderating this. But I knew he was up for the job, and you really did step up and deliver, Steve, so we really appreciate that. And last but not least, I want to thank the audience, both those of you who have joined us today, but also the many of you who are going to be watching this on YouTube afterwards. I know many of the students are being tasked with watching this as part of their syllabus as they wrap up this semester. And if you will indulge me for a second, I want to speak specifically to those students. My longest tenure job and the most meaningful work of my professional career was the years that I spent at a district attorney's office, first as an appellate prosecutor and later as chief of staff. So when our incredible advisory board suggested this forum, I really embraced it as a chance to celebrate that work. The people who with incredible intention and sometimes at great personal cost who do that work each and every day, and also the communities who are served by that meaningful work. Because prosecution is not just any profession. As Professor Cassidy, who's up there, knows, prosecutors have a higher ethical obligation, and he teaches professional ethics, and tells all of our students this in his class. In fact, the rules of professional conduct have a special section for prosecutors. Those rules say that a prosecutor has the responsibility of a minister of justice and not simply that of an advocate. And this is a time when there's real skepticism, not just here in Norfolk County, but all around the country about that ideal. And so there's a real, that's really the reason why a race like this and candidates who are as distinguished as yourselves really matter. They remind us that this role is not just about power, but purpose, that discretion is not just authority, but responsibility, and that the choices that prosecutors make each and every day shape not only public safety outcomes, but institutional legitimacy, community trust and well-being, and also all of our collective belief in equity and in justice. And so the choice that we make here in Norfolk County, I'm a Norfolk County voter myself, and I know many of our students are Norfolk County voters, the choice that we make this September about who our elected prosecutor is going to be, that's a really powerful and meaningful choice. And we hope that this opportunity has given all of us insight into how to exercise that choice in a meaningful fashion and in a responsible fashion. So thank you all for coming today. And for any audience members who wish to stay and interact with the candidates, you're welcome to grab a cup of coffee, some cookies, and stay behind and chat. Thank you, all of you.